What many families feel to this day is as if they have been abandoned, left to fend for themselves, with no answers, no justice, and no certainty whether this painful process will ever come to an end. These harsh and cutting words were spoken by a survivor of one of the most shocking crimes in the history of Ceará in northeastern Brazil, the event that became known as the Cajazeiras Massacre, which took place in January of 2018 in the city of Fortaleza. This brutal episode claimed the lives of 14 people and left at least 15 others injured. The cruelest detail of all, many of those who died had absolutely no involvement with criminal organizations. They were young people, workers, students, ordinary men and women who simply wanted to enjoy a Saturday night out. But they ended up caught in the crossfire of a ruthless war between rival groups fighting for control of territory in Fortaleza. To understand what happened that night, we need to go back to the Cajazeiras neighborhood of Fortaleza, more specifically to a location on Mother Teresa of Calcutta Street, a modest dance hall and bar known locally as the Forró do Gago. The Forró do Gago was a simple and popular establishment, well known in the area. It was the kind of place where locals gathered to dance, drink inexpensive beer, and relax after a long week. It was frequented by all sorts of people, including, at times, members of a powerful criminal faction from Rio de Janeiro who occasionally requested songs that openly praised their organization. But on the night of January 27, 2018, this place of leisure would tragically transform into a scene of horror. Among the most heartbreaking stories of that tragedy is the story of Maria Ferreira, a 17-year-old student. Maria was just 2 months pregnant and preparing for her wedding. That evening, she went to the Forró do Gago only to meet her friend, a seamstress, to discuss the details of her wedding dress. It was meant to be a simple and joyful encounter, yet cruel fate placed her in the middle of a massacre. Hours later, well after midnight, Maria's mother, Terezinha de Jesus, who was still recovering from surgery, received a desperate phone call. The Forró do Gago had been attacked. She ran on foot to the location, and what she saw when she arrived would mark her forever. The scene was devastating. Bodies scattered on the floor, broken bottles and overturned tables, shoes and sandals abandoned by those who had tried to flee in panic. In the midst of this chaos, she found her daughter, lying lifeless and covered in blood, still holding on to her friend Raquel Neves, the 22-year-old seamstress who was making her wedding gown. Both young women had died side by side. This was only one of many stories of grief from that tragic night. According to the investigation, the attackers arrived in 3 vehicles, heavily armed with pistols and assault rifles. There were around 20 gunmen in total. They stormed into the Forró do Gago, shouting the name of their criminal organization, the Guardiões do Estado, or Guardians of the State, known locally as the GD. This group was aligned with the Primeiro Comando de Capital, or PCC, one of the largest criminal organizations originating in São Paulo. The attack was meant as a violent retaliation against the Comando Vermelho, the Red Command, a rival faction from Rio de Janeiro that held influence in the area and whose members frequented that very nightclub. But the violence was not confined to the dance hall itself. Minutes before the invasion, around 12:30 a.m., a man named Nathaniel Abreu da Silva had already been shot inside his car, just outside the location. He became the first victim of the night. After him, the gunmen spread terror not only inside the Forró do Gago, but also across the nearby sidewalks and streets, shooting indiscriminately. Among the victims was Antonio José Dias de Oliveira, a hot dog vendor who worked tirelessly to provide for his family. He was fatally struck during the attack. His 12-year-old son was also shot, but survived his injuries. For that family, only grief remained, and the agonizing question of how to survive without the provider of their household. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this massacre is that the attackers had no specific target. They were not seeking one particular person. They were there to kill, to impose fear, to demonstrate power. They opened fire on men and women alike, on the young and the old, on anyone unfortunate enough to be present. And what was left the following morning? An entire community traumatized. The floor of the Forró do Gago still stained with blood. Abandoned shoes and broken glass as silent witnesses to the chaos. And memories that will never fade from the minds of those who survived. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Cajazeiras massacre, one of the most notorious and haunting episodes of violence not only in the history of Ceará, but in all of Brazil. A case that exposes the brutality of the ongoing war between rival factions, but also highlights the fragility of the thousands of families who are left vulnerable, caught in the crossfire of a battle they never chose. And so, when we look at the list of victims, the cruelty of this massacre becomes even clearer. Out of the 14 lives lost that night, 8 were women and 6 were men. Among the women, 5 were very young, between 15 and 22 years old, girls who had their entire lives ahead of them. 3 others were between 32 and 38 years old, women who carried dreams, families, and responsibilities. Among the men, 3 were in their early 20s, full of youth, energy, and possibility. 2 were in their 30s and 40s, men in the prime of their lives. And 1 was 55 years old, a father who worked selling hot dogs to support his family. The massacre of Cajazeiras was not just an attack on individuals. It was an attack on families, on a community, on the very sense of safety and dignity that every human being deserves. 14 lives were taken in just a few minutes. Lives of students, workers, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers. And for each of these victims, there remain families who continue to grieve and questions that may never be answered. This is the story of Cajazeiras, a story of violence, yes, but also a reminder of how fragile life can be when entire communities are caught in the crossfire of a war they never chose. So that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please support us by leaving a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next uploads. Your engagement really helps our work and allows this content to reach more people. And of course, feel free to share it with your friends to help spread the message even further. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.